In this video, we're going to take a look at how to build an interactive visualization in Mappica. We'll be building this, a visualization showing how commuting trends have shifted in recent years in the United States. We can switch between viewing data before, during, and after the COVID pandemic. And as we do that, you can see that the 6 maps in our visualization updated dynamically. We can also switch into a table view and view the same data in a table format. And beneath the table, we can toggle which data series are displayed in the table. Let's switch out of our preview mode, enter editing mode, and take a look at the dataset that we're using in this visualization. The first thing to note is that if I order by state, you can see that the dataset actually contains 3 rows of data per state, one for each year. And what's going to be happening in our visualization is that when we click that checkbox for, say, 2019, we'll actually be filtering out all dataset rows that contain the values 2021 and 2023. Our dataset also contains columns representing the different commuting methods like drove alone and carpooled, and you'll notice that there are 6 in total, 1 for each of the 6 maps. We need a base map loaded into our project to display the geographic data in each map, and we've loaded that here. Okay, let's now build this right from the beginning. We'll open up an empty project, and in this project, let's begin by adding a data set. We can upload one right here, and we'll drag a CSV file and click Next. These are all the columns detected inside the CSV file, and we want to load all of them. You'll notice that the data type is being automatically detected on the right of the screen, and those data types look good. We'll click Confirm. One thing we can change immediately is the year format. We can go and pick a simpler year format like this. Something else to note is that however we format the various columns in the data set will be retained on the visualization side. For instance, if we adjust the rounding of this drove alone column, whenever drove alone data is depicted in the visualization, it will have that rounding. With the data set in place, let's now add the base map that we need. We can just click on New Base Map. We'll find one. We can search for United States states. And we'll click Confirm. Now that we have our data set and base map, let's start building the visualization. We can start by updating the title. And if we need to set any settings for the entire visualization, we can do that on the right of the screen here. Next, let's get some sections in place. Sections are containers for other elements on the canvas like maps and charts. We already have a section here. Let's rename that to be Controls section. This will contain the checkboxes and buttons that you saw in the original visualization. We'll also go ahead and add a Maps section, as well as a Table section. You'll notice that sections are indicated in red, and when we select items that are placed inside sections, such as this title, those are indicated in blue. Next, to control which sections are visible at any point in time, we need a navigation element. We can add this using a shortcut icon that will appear when we hover on a section. In this case, we want the navigation to be displayed as buttons, and we'll right align it. We'll select the buttons that will appear inside it. The first one can say Maps, and the second one Table. In the Connections tab, we'll choose which sections should be displayed when each of these 2 buttons is clicked. When Maps is clicked, we'll display the Maps section, and when Table is clicked, we'll select the Table section. The other sections, like say the title section will remain visible throughout. So let's try this out. I'm going to click Table, and you can see that this is now the table section. I'll click Maps again, and we have the Maps section. Now let's set up those checkboxes so users can switch between 2019, 2021, and 2023. To do this, we'll need a filter element, because filter elements allow us to control which rows are displayed in the elements that they're connected to. This time, let's use the Insert menu, and we'll drag a filter element onto the canvas. And notice that by dragging it into the same section as the navigation element, it's placed alongside it. And that's because by default, sections arrange content inside them in the row direction. If we switched here to columns, you'll see that the two items inside the section stack one on top of the other. Let's reset it back to rows. And now let's set up the filter. We need to select a display style, just like the navigation. This time let's choose checkbox. We'll connect to our data source, and we'll select the filter field. When we pick the year column, the 3 values that were in that column in the dataset are displayed in our filter. We can go into settings and choose to make one of these the default value. All right, so with the filter in place, let's go ahead and add our first map. We'll come in here and again use the shortcut and select Map. And to begin setting this up, let's select a map type, which is Choropleth. We also need to select a Basemap, which we've loaded. It's this US states Basemap. We need a dataset. Now, Choropleth maps need to know how to join the dataset rows to the geographic shapes in the Basemap. We need to pick a dataset column containing unique identifiers for the state, which in this case can be the state name. And over in the Basemap, we'll need to select a join field that also contains the state names. Let's find one by previewing the Basemap data. We can see over here that there's a name column that contains the names of the different states. And so back in the join field, let's select name. Next, let's go into colors, and we'll set the drove alone column as the color. We can complete the map by adding tooltips. We can see that when we hover over a state, the percentage is actually much larger than we expected. And that's because all 3 years of data are being supplied to each state, and those are then being aggregated by adding them together. To fix this, we need to connect the map to the filter element that we created. And to do that, let's click on Connections and select the filter. And now the value is as expected. We can toggle to 2021 or 2019 to see the map update in real time. With that in place, let's create the remaining maps. And we can do this just by duplicating the first one. We can update the color field and color gradient for each of our maps. Let's rearrange the maps now. They're automatically displayed in a row. And with the section selected, let's come over here to direction and change to columns wrapping right. And we'll choose to have 3 columns and 2 rows. And then when we switch to mobile view, we'll adjust the layout so that the maps stack in a single column for better readability. Now you may have noticed this red highlighting. This just indicates that a property is being inherited. Properties cascade from wider screens to narrower screens. So for instance, this width property is being inherited while the direction property over here, which we just set, is specific to the mobile screen size. Okay, I'm going to return to desktop mode. And with all of our maps in place, let's now start adding some titles to display above each map. I'm going to drag it in here and type driving alone, select it, and we can align it. Now, before we move on to adding other text titles, I'm going to select the section and then update the rows to be 4 rows. And now there'll be space when we add 6 titles and we have our 6 maps. There'll be 12 in total, and there'll be space for all of them. So let's go ahead now and duplicate this text. I'm going to create 6 copies, and I'm going to go ahead and update each of them. You might notice that the height of the different text items is a lot taller than perhaps we were expecting, and that's because the height of elements is determined by the tallest item in each row. So when we shift around the titles and have only titles in one row and only maps in one row, the height of the text items will adjust back accordingly. Let's now rearrange the text and the maps so that the text is above each of the maps. All right, so that looks good. We can now move on to looking at text that is dynamically controlled. And to see how this works, let's open up our heading here and select a dataset and establish a connection to our filter. Now, back in the title, we're going to type the hash key, and this will reveal a list of columns in our dataset. We can select the year column, and now we can have our title say commuting in America in, and then the selected year. As we update that year, because the title text is linked to this filter element, the year displayed in the title will update dynamically. With our title and maps looking good, let's switch back to the table section that we created right at the start of this video, and we'll add our table. Again, we can do that just using the shortcut button here. We can go in and select a data source. We'll choose our state as the category field and each of our commute methods as series fields. We should connect the table to the filter, and we can set the allow user sorting option to allow the columns to be sorted dynamically. We can also go into settings, customize the columns, and give each of them a consistent minimum width. And finally, add a search field. Now let's set up some table colors. And there are a few options available, including assigning colors by column as well as by row. But in our case, let's assign them by cell. Now we could create a single color scheme for all columns by just simply assigning all of the columns here to this color scheme. And you can see that this has created a heat map where all of the columns use the same color gradient to depict the data values. But instead of this approach, let's use the color formatting that we had in our maps. We'll remove each of these color fields here, and we're going to go ahead and create a separate color scheme for each column. We'll start by adding a new color scheme and selecting the second column for carpooled. We can add the right color gradient colors, and we can continue to do this for each of the remaining columns. With that in place, let's add the checkboxes that were displayed beneath the table. And we're going to want to choose a selector element. Remember that filters allowed us to show and hide dataset rows, but this time around, because we need to pick columns, we're using a selector. And I'm going to place this in the same section as the table. We can then select the section and rearrange it in a column to place the selector beneath the table. Next, I'll select the selector, and we can make it checkboxes. Under connections, we'll pick table, and under settings, let's make all of the values display when the visualization first loads. And now, as we check and uncheck these checkboxes, we see columns in the table displaying and hiding. Everything is now in place, so we can go ahead and publish the visualization. We can just do that up here and click the Publish button. Once the publishing is finished, we can choose to either view the published page or click Copy Embed Code to insert the visualization into our website. And that's it. We're done. We set up sections and made them responsive. We added filter and navigation elements. We added maps and positioned them in a responsive section. And of course, we added the table and the selector beneath the table that allowed us to control its columns. The result is this fully interactive commuting trends visualization, all built in just a few minutes using Mappica.